I've often been called the inverse of the rest of the community. While a lot of bronies will readily nitpick episodes to absurd degrees and give incredible amounts of slack to fanworks, I'm very positive toward episodes and very critical of fanworks. I find this is important to point out because with a title like Worst Episodes, one would think I'm about to unleash all that pent-up bile that has been secretly building for 4 years. Not so. Much like the nostalgia critic with Avatar, I really don't think there's such a thing as a bad episode of Friendship is Magic. Probably only one episode I could say is genuinely awful, and populating this list is more worst by default. Something, no matter how good it may be, has to be last. Before we can really talk about the best episodes of the series, which I want to do, it only makes sense to acknowledge the worst. To that end, let's piss off the fandom once again with the top 10 worst episodes of Friendship is Magic. It's very rare that I forget to watch an episode of a TV series, especially when watching that series is part of my job. But when Power Ponies aired, that is exactly what I did. I took one look at the name and the synopsis, and I just didn't bother tuning in. I was expecting a very lackluster love letter to Silver Age comics, and that is exactly what I got when I finally bothered to watch it. The major problem with the episode is that nothing happens. Other episodes at the very least focused on more tangible issues Equestria would often be left to deal with. But in Power Ponies, they just go to comic book world, break into another dimension, kill its villain, and leave. Say developed by Tetsuya Nomura, and we're done. I get the feeling that the basic idea could have been made far more compelling. Like, what if instead of being warped into the comic book's villain was warped into Equestria? That would at least give some degree of weight to the idea of, hey, our friend who's really into comic books wasn't actually wasting his life by reading them. As it stands, the entire episode is about Spike discovering that he isn't useless. But didn't we already do this? Lesson Zero, the Crystal Empire, even the later Equestria games all did this basic idea in a less contrived manner. Spike feels that he's useless, and then the universe simply hands him a situation to prove his usefulness right out of the ether. I get the feeling that there was a lot of potential here to demonstrate just how much magic can affect the boundaries of reality. Again, another Season 4 episode did this very well. Power Ponies does absolutely nothing. It's a paint-by-numbers superheroes episode, the very definition of filler content, and Friendship is Magic always did its filler content far better than this. I didn't watch this episode when it aired, and I was not looking forward to watching it for this list. It's the show's equivalent of dead weight.
You are all of you beneath me. I am a god, you dull creature, and I will not be bullied by that.
Puny god.
Don't do drugs, kids, or you're gonna trip the out. To be fair, I think there's actually a lot of good stuff woven into the Cutie Pox, particularly the scene with Zecora introducing Apple Bloom to alchemy, something we saw make a return 2 seasons later. Unfortunately, instead of building on that, the Cutie Pox inevitably returns to the rather tired formula as a lot of other CMC-focused episodes. One thing Friendship is Magic has a big problem with is that while most characters get a lot of varied episodes that cover a wide variety of topics tied into the character, certain other characters fall into very strict formulas that they very rarely, if ever, break out of. The only real problem with this is that when a formula isn't adjusted often enough, it becomes very, very, very tiresome. And the Cutie Mark Crusaders are no exception. Apple Bloom effectively brews up her own virus and infects herself with it, and the rest of the episode is dedicated to more and more tattoos popping up on her body, and she grows more and more out of control. They diagnose it, they fix it, and it's all over. The Cutie Pox is a difficult episode to analyze because I'm not entirely certain what the point of it was. Lying? Drug abuse? The impatience for puberty? Texans don't know what French is? I don't know. And when I'm left as confused as to the intent of the episode, I'm forced to look toward the comedy. And to that end, the Cutie Pox didn't make me laugh. Once. And to me, that is the cardinal sin. I can handle bad morals to a point, I can handle bad characterization to a point, but when you cannot make me laugh, then you have failed me. Sit in the corner, Apple Bloom. You remember when I said this was a worst list by default and that it's not necessarily a bad episode? Try to keep that in mind here because Tradia is certainly a major offender here. I find the episode is spread far too thin, splitting up its time between 3 different story arcs, only one of which serves any significance to the audience, that being Rainbow and Fluttershy's storyline. The other 2 honestly feel like they exist entirely to fill the time, like if this series was made about 10 years ago, it'd be split into 2 15-minute episodes. Not too bad to be honest, but...
If she comes and stays with us in Manhattan until it's trained. So we got a fair deal?
Of course it's a deal! And I'm sorry, Rainbow Dash, but my hooves are tied. You said it was a fair trade.
Yeah, like a lot of people, this is a big issue for me. The fact that Fluttershy was, in some way, traded into indentured servitude. And not only that Rainbow, in her irritating lack of focus, goes along with it, but that Fluttershy outright agrees to it. I hadn't realized the biggest issue with this until Silverquill's review came out. Up until this point in the episode, Fluttershy has been selfless. But here, she is being a pushover, and the whole sequence is just set up for Rainbow to have an epiphany. But then it comes at the expense of Fluttershy's character, and Fluttershy doesn't have a lot of character to spare in the first place. More to the point, not only does this happen, but the law seems to be totally cool with it. I sort of assumed it would be an unwritten rule, don't buy people, but apparently trading ponies like their livestock is totally okay. That's f***ed up, and it's so ridiculously f***ed up that it can only exist for its own Aesop. It's a contrivance, only so the writers could pull the double moral about personal possessions having value, and that possessions aren't more valuable than people out of nowhere. You can't trade a person. Come on now. Even someone with as little fortitude as Fluttershy wouldn't go along with that. Even Fluttershy wouldn't be this insane. Though I do have to say that I love that single moment of brilliance that the writer slipped in under our very noses that does make up for most of this. If you actually take a close look toward the very end, you'll notice something. Fluttershy is the one who was the most focused on helping Rainbow Dash, even to the point of losing her own possessions and nearly being sold. And she's the only one who walks away from the trade fair with exactly what she was looking for in the first place.
Karma.
DHX, that's a nice save. Like any other person of sound body and mind, I was relatively okay with Twilight becoming an alicorn. You know what would have made me even more okay with it? If her ascension wasn't one of the most painful episodes to ever have to sit through. One frequent criticism lobbed at Magical Mystery Cure is that the entire plot is rushed beyond belief. And that isn't true. The pacing is actually handled rather well. It's that the whole episode is on fast forward for 3/4 of its runtime. There's just too many musical numbers throughout the entire episode, and each one is either a montage, a throwaway, or a ballad. And the only songs that actually need to be in there and actually serve the episode in any positive way are Celestia's Ballad and Behold Princess Twilight Sparkle. Every other musical number in this episode can be scrapped because they do nothing but take up space. It's like you're watching a really fun episode of Friends, but every 2 minutes some kid jumps up to start singing Katy Perry songs. You just want the little brat to sit down because Katy Perry is absolutely terrible, and you hate the fact she's poisoning the musical taste of impressionable young children to grow up enjoying safe, bland garbage, and then inevitably start giving fistfuls of money to people who shit on the very face of good music, and you cry for the miserable state of... Sorry, I got a little distracted there. But all that takes a backseat to the biggest problem with the episode. It was spoiled! The whole purpose of the episode is for Twilight to finish an incomplete spell, and that ascends her to princesshood. And that would have been a really great idea if Hasbro hadn't spoiled it in the promos. Go back over the scenes where Twilight is transformed and the whole thing is presented like this big reveal, something the whole series has been building toward at this point. And yet when one actually watches it, they're just waiting for the moment where Twilight transforms, and then they knock off for some coffee. All that intended holy shit, she just became a princess, and this is Equestria, where that actually means something, vanishes the moment you're expecting it. And the fact that the episode does nothing but build up that anticipation means you're left with nothing to satisfy you. Have you ever sat back and realized just how childlike the main six were in the first season? Anybody with at least one functioning eye in their skull can see that the main six are very easily somewhere around their 20s and 30s. Most of them either have jobs or their own businesses, their own homes, and one of them is a freaking deity. And in most seasons this is reflected very well. They're adults with adult problems translated to a format that kids can understand and sympathize with. But in season 1, I don't know, something about the way they behave reminds me more of little kids. I suppose that makes sense, the franchise has done this for 30 years, but still, seeing adults behave with the demeanor of a 5-year-old was always a little jarring for me. What was I talking about? Well, anyway, Swarm of the Century. Actually, now that I think about it, there's nothing to talk about with Swarm of the Century. The biggest problem with it is that it's also safe. It's your typical lack of communication storyline, and the failing with this is that everybody knows how it's going to end. The specifics are the only gray area, and even then the episode hammers you with hints about it from start to finish. Now this is where I hit a snag, honestly. I've always found if you're going to call an episode bad or poorly handled, one must be able to think of a better way to handle it without changing the overall story, i.e. how does one write Swarm of the Century while still keeping in the misunderstanding and lack of communication regarding the Parasprite incident. I honestly can't think of one. The closest I come to is the Tao of Blook, an episode of The Weekenders that dealt with a similar conflict. And one of the reasons it was good is because you never really knew where the hook was, and it was more a story about overestimating one's own abilities and underestimating another than about a lack of communication. Swarm of the Century is a cliche that is so overdone and so tiresome that it's honestly best to just let it die as a storytelling technique. But that's me being a 22-year-old who's seen this a lot. And this isn't written for me, it's written for kids who aren't as sick of this cliche as I am. I'm on record as someone who genuinely enjoys both Equestria Girls movies. They're a very fun detour from the series itself, and much of what makes Friendship is Magic so much fun can really breathe some life into that old high school setting that nobody has ever really done well before. That being said, Equestria Girls was never that well versed in the writing department. I find the big issue is that the movie has to serve double duty in both trying to establish a whole new world and a whole new set of characters, alongside telling its own story with its own 3-act structure. This is a problem that the series pilot itself has, so why is the pilot not on the list? Because you sort of expected that. The pilot introduces you to every character, and by virtue of being a TV series, it's going to take a few episodes to really get going. But when they do it a second time for the movie, you're already familiar with everything in the series, so the faults in this process become all the more glaring. They have to introduce you to who Pinkie Pie is, but it's been 3 seasons. We already know who Pinkie Pie is. We already know Fluttershy, Applejack, Celestia. I will say that Rarity's introduction flows a lot better as the writers assume they don't need to introduce you to the characters anymore. Same with Rainbow Dash. Now, with a TV show, you can sort of forgive this since there's going to be more episodes and you're not really paying for it beyond your cable bill. A theatrical movie, on the other hand, has to stand up on its own as a story, even if it's going to be part of a series. Iron Man was still a solid standalone movie, even if it was also starting off the chain of the Avengers movies. Ditto with Star Wars. Equestria Girls is a movie with the setup time of a TV series. And one of the reasons Rainbow Rocks was so much better was because it didn't need to multitask. And also this. It's a fault you could theoretically forgive, but you've made a change in the medium without making a change in the writing. I also find the movie is too laden with fan service and nods to the community. Again, something Rainbow Rocks did much better. I find the movie is too eager to shove as many background ponies and fan favorite characters in for pointless cameos, especially this one bit with the Cutie Mark Crusaders reading YouTube comments. Come on, we all know this isn't an accurate depiction of a YouTube video about the CMC, because if it was, the comments would be filled with bronies declaring how much they want to You know, I really wish the writers would make up their minds about the Wonderbolts. They're Stunflyers in one episode, then Racers in another episode, and then both Testing 123 and Wonderbolts Academy establish them as being a paramilitary force. And I'll be honest, it's rather cute that Equestria keeps a military handy when one of their demigods kicks so much ass that her hooves permanently smell of farts. So Testing 123 sees Rainbow Dash trying to study for her entrance exam to join the Wonderbolts Reserve. Only she hits a snag, namely that she apparently dropped out of high school and can't retain any sort of study habits to save her life. So Twilight and the rest of their friends all attempt to get Rainbow to learn the history of the Wonderbolts, forcefully if necessary. As a premise goes, this is already weak, and this is where we run into the main issue with the episode. It exists for the sake of its Aesop. Every episode has a lesson to impart to kids, but they are still entertaining on their own in case the lesson doesn't actually need to be learned by the viewer. Testing 123 does not do that. Unless you aren't already aware that there are multiple ways to teach a student, this episode is completely worthless. When the story is built for the sake of the lesson, everything in the episode is a contrivance. Rainbow cannot focus to any degree when she needs to. This level of ADD never appeared before and never appears again. It exists entirely because it needed to for this lesson. All of Rainbow's friends have a better working knowledge of the Wonderbolts' history than she does. Why? Because the plot demands it. In fact, that bothers me as well. I can sort of understand Rainbow not knowing the history of the Wonderbolts itself, but how is it that everybody in Ponyville knows their history better than she does? Rainbow is obsessed with the Wonderbolts to an absurd degree. If there was anyone in Ponyville who to have a mental encyclopedia of their history, it would be her. But no, Rainbow knows the very least about the very things she has dedicated her life to? No, that does not fly, no pun intended. That is fan fiction levels of not understanding your own character. The fact that Rainbow has to be tricked into learning the history of one of her own idols is telling of one of two things. One, that Rainbow doesn't like the Wonderbolts as much as she lets on, or two, that the writers experienced a minor brain hemorrhage somewhere down the line, and I'm gonna put my money on the latter. Even putting that aside, the episode is boring. Fluttershy's theatrical presentation is so awkwardly presented I'd swear it was written by Silly Philly Studios. Pinkie's rap number is painful to listen to, and I have no idea what the hell Rarity is doing. Probably the only entertaining moment in this series is when Rainbow Dash is goofing around in her seat instead of paying attention to Twilight, because it was exactly what I was doing by the end of the episode.
Wonderbolts, yeah! Wonderbolts, Wonderbolts, yeah! Wonderbolts, that is my rapping history of the Wonderbolts.
Your music's bad and you should feel bad.
You know, if there's one thing Friendship is Magic has always been good at, it's the season finales. Changeling Horde invades Equestria under the cover of a wedding? Awesome idea. Twilight creates new magic and ascends to princesshood? Awesome idea. Big ass demon wrecks everyone's shit? Awesome idea. The main six crash a party. Oh yeah. Let's be honest here, how many of you think of the best night ever whenever you think of episodes you remember with the most affection? Yeah, that's what I thought. The best night ever has been completely eclipsed by every other premiere and finale the series has had thus far. And that's pretty weird considering how much build-up the whole episode had. If you remember, Season 1 had several episodes focusing on the Grand Galloping Gala and how the main six were preparing for it, similar to that Rainbow Eyes storyline from Season 4. But then we finally get there and it's actually pretty dull. The whole episode amounts to the main six discovering that the Grand Galloping Gala is just a rather boring social event for high society types, and that all the hype that they'd been making turned the whole thing into a disappointment. And then a whole lot of nothing happens. It's got the same problem as Tradia, where it flits around between every character, but only one gets any degree of payoff. This is the problem with a season-long arc. The conclusion inevitably becomes an obligation. They had to conclude with the Grand Galloping Gala after all that build-up. In Season 4, the Crystal Box and its 6 keys were so vague that they could have been anything, so the writing team had enough elbow room to work with. Here, it was very clear what the Grand Galloping Gala was, and there was no room to breathe. I suppose the lesson could have been that hyping up an event only leads to disappointment. One problem though, you hyped up an episode about why hype is bad. That's like trying to teach someone the dangers of smoking by forcing them to smoke an entire pack of cigarettes. The event is supposed to be a disappointment for the characters. The episode is not supposed to be a disappointment for the viewer. It's very rare that the message of a TV show or movie hits such an uncomfortable chord with me, but yeah, Feeling Pinky Keen really does have the worst possible message to ever put into the minds of kids. I'm not getting into the whole religious debate thing either. Someone taking their ethical standards from Christ is really no different from me taking my ethical standards from Captain Janeway. No, I'm talking about the way it tells kids that buying into arcane superstition is somehow a good thing. Feeling Pinky Keen spends a solid 22 minutes doing exactly that. Everything in the episode is artificially stacked against Twilight to force her into giving into the idea that Pinky can predict the future. From breaking every bone in Twilight's body to saving Fluttershy from a freaking Hydra. The whole theme of the episode reminds me of that one clip from Adventure Time that hammers in the fallacy that the law is made entirely to keep people down, and that if you get arrested, then it wasn't your fault, the law is just unfair. No, you know what? Fuck that. You want to be a paranoid lunatic? Fine, be a paranoid lunatic, but don't throw this shit into a children's show. Contrary to what the internet may tell you, what you see in fiction as a child does in fact color your worldview, however subtly, as an adult. Keep this nonsense in shows directed at people who know better. The benefits of things like how to handle fear, how to handle peer pressure, and the importance of forgiveness are all good things, but this, it isn't just a bad moral, it's a flat-out toxic moral. The fact that Feeling Pinky Keen is a genuinely funny episode spares at the #1 spot. Speaking of which... Oh, who the hell am I kidding? You know it's Feely Vanilli. If you've been following me for a while, you know that I can't stand this episode. And it's the only episode I would ever say was a genuinely bad episode. I criticized Power Ponies for doing absolutely nothing with Spike that both previous and later episodes hadn't already done better, but with Feely Vanilli we got exactly that once again. What makes it worse? Well, there's a lot of things you can do with Fluttershy that you can't do with Spike. And my biggest problem with the series in general is that they have constantly recycled the same plotline with Fluttershy over and over and over again. Fluttershy is timid. People try to make her stop being timid. She shows some growth, and that growth vanishes the next time the writing team has run out of coffee. And that doubles a problem we've seen across the whole series. It's a series about how friendship and being social are the most wonderful things in the world, so much so that 3 seasons are devoted to one character learning to stop being so dismissive of being social. And yet one of your main characters is so incompatible and so anxious that I'm pretty sure there's a mental illness in desperate need of a diagnosis. Feely Vanilli is just more of that. Oh, we need a baritone singer for the ponytones. Oh, the poison joke will do that to Fluttershy. Oh, but Fluttershy is driven to the brink of insanity if there's more than 3 sets of eyes looking in her general direction. And you could slag off other episodes for doing this as well, like Putting Your Hoof Down or Dragonshy, but all of those episodes at least gave the illusion of moving forward, even if Fluttershy hit the reset button the next time around anyway. Feely Vanilli doesn't move forward. The very end of the episode even alludes to the fact that Fluttershy is just going to be doing this same song and dance again when the writers feel they can get away with it. What's worse is the conflict of the story is an exact duplicate of Hurricane Fluttershy, a much better episode with a much better payoff and much higher stakes. Feely Vanilli does nothing in its entire 22-minute runtime other than cement Fluttershy as someone in desperate need of counseling. I've heard that some people say that Fluttershy is an accurate depiction of social anxiety. Bullshit. I don't know exactly what Fluttershy has, but it's far more serious and far more damaging than the word anxiety would allow. If you have social anxiety on this kind of level, you need to see a doctor right away. And if there really are a lot of people with that severe of anxiety, then the fact that the series as a whole coddles those people is flat out dangerous. This is not healthy. If this is you, seek help. I'm Jerry. Thanks for watching.